U.S. Representative from the 6th Congressional District here in the great state of Washington. It's Representative Derek Kilmer. Good morning, Derek.
Hey, good morning. Good to be with you.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. It's super muggy back here.
Oh, it is?
Everybody's a sweaty mess, but other than that, we're all right.
How are the cherry blossoms looking? Do they come and go already? Or?
Yeah, pretty much. Yep.
Really? Already? Oh,
yeah.
Gosh, seems a little earlier than normal. It has been quite the week in Washington over the last 8 to 10 days. A lot of things have been going on. First, some thoughts on Mueller being put for special prosecutor for this Russia deal, just kind of overall with the Trump administration. Where are you sitting with all this stuff?
I think the appointment of the former FBI director is actually a rare appointment in that it's something that Democrats and Republicans all agree that he's a capable person and should do a good and thorough job. I think having a special prosecutor named or an independent investigation is appropriate, and I think. And my hope is that, part of the problem, Congress has got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. On one hand, it's absolutely appropriate to make sure we're protecting the integrity of our democracy and making sure that foreign actors like Russia are not trying to disrupt our system of government. It's absolutely appropriate to make sure that we're preventing against conflicts of interest in government. But at the same time, you can't see Congress take its eye off the ball and not work on things like getting this economy moving and dealing with some of the just nuts and bolts issue of infrastructure and education and those sorts of things that our country needs to stay competitive. And so my hope is that's what happens going forward.
Is there work being done? I understand. I mean, most of the stories coming out do come from the White House, and other than the intelligence committees that are meeting to talk about this, there is the other work being done. I mean, is the tax reform still being pushed through, working on that? Things like those types of bills still working on, and they're just we just don't hear about it because there's so much other stuff happening?
Well, so I'll separate that into two discussions. One, there's the big stuff like tax reform and infrastructure, where frankly I don't think we've seen enough progress made. This week was the first week that there was actually a hearing on the subject of tax reform. I mean, it's May, and the fact that it's taken this long, I think, is really a disappointment because that's a big deal, right? I mean, that's important to the competitiveness of our country, making sure we're seeing investments here in the United States rather than someplace else, making sure we have a system that's better for small businesses on the peninsula and everywhere else for that matter, making sure the middle-class families get a break because Lord knows they need it. That's important, and I think that's something that should not that should not that should not be delayed. This is something that unlike healthcare, where it was rammed through in a week, this is something that we got to get right, and so my hope is that that's what you see going forward. And then secondly, so there's the big stuff like that hopefully will move forward, but that hasn't seen the attention it deserves. And then there's a bunch of little bills that we work on every week that are, often non-controversial bills, but can be important in one way or another. And those bills continue to move without a lot of attention or fanfare.
Seems like the reports are that North Korea may have been behind this big ransomware, WannaCry, 150 million folks or something, and impacted by this thing. What do you think about this?
Well, ransomware is something that is not a new phenomenon, unfortunately, and I think we talked last year when I sent a letter to the Homeland Security Department, basically calling for more attention to ransomware attacks. And I did that in part because we were already seeing hospital systems and municipal governments and utilities and small businesses face these cyber hacks and these ransomware attacks. In fact, I had breakfast with a Republican colleague of mine earlier this week, and he said, Derek, my own family business was a victim of a ransomware attack.
Wow.
And part of the reason I reached out to the Homeland Security Department is there's really no roadmap for folks when this happens. There aren't clear rules of the road on how to handle this. And, we need a better playbook. And government can be helpful in that. It's not unlike in the public health arena. If there's a salmonella, outbreak or something like that, the Centers for Disease Control has a roadmap for restaurants and for food handlers and for people who may have eaten something that's infected, and provides guidance to make sure that this doesn't become an even worse problem. That does not currently exist in the cyber realm, and I think we absolutely need it to do so. The only other thing I'll mention, since you referenced North Korea, another example of something that Congress actually did with very little fanfare was 2 weeks ago. You saw a near unanimous vote on a bill to ratchet up sanctions on North Korea as a consequence of the continued threats that they pose. Frankly, not just in the cyber domain, but as they work to develop an intercontinental ballistic missile and try to put a nuclear warhead on it. That's something we simply cannot allow to happen. And I think you're seeing a bipartisan support for using some of the tools that we have in our foreign policy toolbox to address that.
How much do you think China should be involved with this?
I think China really needs to be involved with this. I mean, frankly, particularly from a diplomatic and, frankly, from an economic standpoint, they probably, they undeniably have more capacity to influence North Korea's behavior than we do.
Yeah.
And I think it's appropriate that the administration has had that dialogue with China, and I hope China is willing to engage.
During one of the recent recesses, you were here in the area, stopped by the Pierce County Jail, talking a lot about mental health challenges for the region. And there at the jail, you introduced some bipartisan mental health resolution. Talk to me about that one.
Yeah, you know what? After my first term in office, I got asked by the News Tribune a pretty simple question, which is what surprised you most in your time in office? And I gave a completely non-political and honest answer. And what I told them was what surprised me most is how much mental health comes up in this job. I was out at Joint Base Lewis McChord. I met with the leadership there, and I said, what's keeping you up at night? Thinking they were going to say, budget cuts or terrorists. And what they said was mental health. I had a former three-star out there, General Brown, said to me, I've lost more soldiers to suicide than I have to enemy combatants. When I went to the jail in Pierce County last Thursday, they have 90 people in a mental health unit that are, have significant mental health problems. And perhaps if those problems had been addressed, they wouldn't be in jail right now. When I meet with law enforcement officers, they say, gosh, we're not trained to be mental health professionals, but boy, it's sure showing up for us. When I meet with housing and social service providers, when I went to the school district, this just comes up everywhere. And we have a massive unmet need. And I'm working on two things on this front. One, we just introduced a bipartisan resolution to designate May Mental Health Month. And I think part of that is just trying to destigmatize the conversation around mental health. And we've got to understand that illnesses above the neck are not fundamentally different than illnesses below the neck. They're illnesses, and they need to be addressed in a healthcare setting. But secondly, we're working on trying to provide greater resources to address mental health care in our communities. Washington State ranks really poorly on this front. I'll give you just one example, and that's inpatient beds. National experts say you want to have between 40 and 60 mental health beds for every 100,000 people in your population. The average in Washington State is 11.9. So we're way under-resourced. In Pierce County, it's 2.8. And so the largest mental health provider in Pierce County is the county jail. And that's true in a lot of counties I represent. And so we've just introduced a bill that has the federal government step up and try to provide some support to communities so that they can build out some of that capacity to actually meet that mental health need. And thankfully, that's a bipartisan bill, and I'm hopeful that we can get it moving.
A big rural area here in the 6th Congressional District, and the continuing resolution that was passed and pushed through as well had some help for some rural jobs, didn't it?
It did. Actually, this is something that, and I'm glad you're asking about, because this is something that didn't get a lot of attention. But 2 weeks ago, Congress passed a funding bill, and it wasn't perfect, but it actually passed with broad bipartisan support. It thankfully avoided another government shutdown, but it also did some good stuff for folks in our region. I'll give you just a couple of examples. You and I have talked about the forest collaborative that we've been working on to try to bring people together to increase harvest levels in a responsible way in our federal forests, and which is really important to rural economies. The bill that just passed included $40 million to encourage the success and growth of those collaboratives, and to hopefully see those collaboratives work and do some restoration work in our forests, to actually see some timber sales move out the door. Another example, you and I have talked about some of the access issues in our forests. And there's something called the Legacy Roads and Trails program that says, listen, when a road gets washed out, if after a severe storm, a road is made or a trail is made inaccessible, that's too big a burden just to put on the backs of a local community to deal with. And so you saw in that funding bill funding for that program called Legacy Roads and Trails that are really critical to restoring those roads, and that's again important to our local economy. So I was pleased with that. There were some other things in that bill that I thought were important. I have, and we've talked about this in the past. I had sponsored a bill focused on financial aid for folks who want to go to college and improving something called the Pell Grant program. Thankfully, some of the elements of the bill I proposed were actually included in that funding bill, and so. I think again, I didn't love every element of the bill, but I think to some degree it was a rare occurrence where you saw Congress do what people have been clamoring for, which is actually work together to solve some problems.
Well, there is some work being done, and we continue to thank you for the good work you do there for the people here in the 6th District. U.S. Representative Derek Kilmer, have a good rest of your day. Have a good weekend. Thanks for checking in with me.
Hey, thanks. Great to be with you.